Hey, what's up, everyone? Huei-Yuan coming to you from Cupertino, California. Today is November 1st, 2022. Welcome to the new month. Hope everyone had a happy Halloween. We're getting back into the live streaming setup. It's been a while since we've done any sort of live streaming, but recent changes on YouTube, content plans that we've been discussing at Ensemble Block has made me start to think about, hey, let's start getting that stuff worked back out again. And if you've ever tried to do any sort of streaming or media setup, live setup, you know it's something that you don't just set up and everything works perfectly. It's something that you kind of chip away at bit by bit. So I'm trying a couple things out today. I've got some upgrades to the studio since I've done a lot of live stream in the past, and just seeing what this looks and sounds like as we're getting going, and then some additional ideas that we want to build on top of what is the version 4.0, 5.0 of this as we move forward. So I thought for today's test, I could show you some of the things that we've been working on in the background. There's an idea that I've had recently that I'm just playing with, and for anyone that does see this, I'd love to get some feedback on what you think about it, and if you have some suggestions or ideas on it as well. So I'm going to try sharing my screen over here, and I'm going to see if I can make myself appear in the bottom right hand corner. Yes, okay, this is working. And the idea behind this is something that I do in lessons all the time when I'm teaching my students, but something recently interesting, or a recent development that's been interesting that's happened, is that I've recently taken on a new student that does not have a percussion background. Numerous times to me, which is, it's a student that is a woodwind player or a bass player, and they see the drum line and they go, "Oh, that's really cool. I want to do that. How do I go about doing that?" And for some reason over the years, I've just developed this random area of expertise of turning non-percussionists into percussionists. But one thing that comes with that is that someone that might go through the normal progression of grades 6, 7, 8, they don't have that. When they come in as a 9th or 10th grader, you're essentially starting from scratch. So something as basic as saying, "Oh, that's just a paradiddle diddle," they don't have any context for what a paradiddle diddle is. So you have to build them up literally from scratch. And so this is also overlapping. The part 2 to this is I'm learning this piece, or I've started to look at this piece, which is written by one of our Ensemble Block team members, Sean Anderson. And I'm looking at this lick that he's written, and in my mind I'm thinking, okay, well, what is the more mature version of learning this? 20 years ago, Huei would have learned it like this, but with my teaching hat on now, I'm applying kind of what I was talking about earlier to someone who doesn't have a background in playing, to getting them up and running and playing something that's very challenging like this. How would you go about doing that? So let me just show you what I'm talking about over here, and you guys can get a better idea of what I've been thinking about. Which is, if you've ever played those traditional like Pratt solos in the back of the books, you've got the etude, and at the very bottom it'll say, "Oh, in this solo you've played flam taps and flam accents and double paradiddles and 17-stroke rolls," and it lists out all the rudiments that you play. Now, if you couple that with, usually when I teach beginners, I write everything down for them on what they should be working on day to day from lesson to lesson, essentially operating under the assumption that they're not going to remember anything that you talked about during the lesson. You need to give them a piece of paper that them and mom and dad can follow during the week, so that there's no question when they sit down and they finally start to practice, they should never be wondering like, "Hey, what am I supposed to be practicing right now?" So under that idea, if you have this piece here, and let's say I'm going to learn superimpose, I'm teaching myself how to practice this now. What I've done is I've gone through and I've listed out all the fundamental rudiments that show up in this etude over here. And you see that I've had to accommodate some of these, like subdivisions is not really a rudiment that you would find in the PAS40 catalog, but quintuplets and septuplets, that's a thing that a student would have to work on and figure out and learn how to play in order to do this. And I've added the application is sometimes it's the same category, like double stroke roll, but you see that there are some inverted 2-count 16th rolls. So I've just made some specific subheaders to double stroke rolls of how it's applied. So in my mind, what I'm thinking is like there's the theoretical rudiment that you learn, but there's also a gap between the actual rudiment and the application of it in a performance or etude context, right? So I want to bridge that gap, and so what I've done here is I've listed out the specific item that's being played. So for example, 16th tap nines. Well, let's do this first one. Inverted 2-count 16th rolls, and that's in measure 10. Over here, you can see here there's this passage. It's an inverted double stroke roll, 2 counts of 16ths, right, with a little bit of a crescendo at the very end. Okay, and something I said during the lesson this past week that kind of echoes some of the things that I've seen or that I do myself also is that, these are the fundamental skills that you should be able to play, that you should be working on. Most of your time is spent developing your foundational technique, your ability to play. The technique should never limit your musicianship, your ability to express what it is that you're trying to play, right? So what I'm trying to say is that for a beginner, what they would typically do if you had an hour to practice, a beginner would typically just play this piece over and over again for an hour. They would kind of hack their way through it and play some rolls and then look at their phone and then play a little bit more and do something else and be distracted and just kind of play this over and over and over again for an hour. And I think something that a more experienced player might do, if I already have the skill set under my belt, then I would just pick a section and kind of shed on that very slowly. But if I were learning this through the lens of my student who does not have a percussion background, I would say, look, I need to get my legato 8 on the hand, 16 on the hand really solid. I need to practice my flams for 5 or 10 minutes every day, a little bit every day. And I only have time to work on these. And I would work on my fundamentals for 30, maybe 40 minutes. And then for 20 minutes, I would work the section of music where those fundamentals show up. And I wouldn't practice the whole piece every day necessarily. Depending on what phase of learning the piece you're in, you might be learning the piece and just working 4 measures because you don't have an hour. You only have 15 minutes to practice. Just being more intentional about how we're spending our practice time so you get the most return for the time that you're spending. That's really what I'm working on with my students when we do these lessons. So I'm trying to make this sheet. This is basically the new thing that I'm thinking about. What does this look like? And I know this is not groundbreaking. Everyone kind of does this, but I will say that traditionally what I do is I do this kind of all in my head as I'm practicing. I'm playing this and I go, oh, that's a new sticking. I'll give you an example. Here, these alternating inverted roll section 16th, that's like I haven't really played that figure before. I know how to play an inverted roll, but typically you might see it like this, or you might see, right? I don't know if I've ever gone as a general rule of thumb, you want to anything you practice off the right, you want to practice off the left also. But I would see that, and I might make an exercise if I feel myself rushing or doing something weird there as I'm learning this. In my head, I'll just say, oh, I need to make up an exercise for that. Okay, and then with my experience, I would say, okay, I should probably just do 4 off the right, 4 off the left. And then I'd probably put that into a 4-2-1, on and on and on. And those are all things that I would just kind of do subconsciously as I'm practicing. But then the question is, if you're not an experienced player, you're not an experienced teacher, what is the thing that you give to your student so that they can replicate that process on their own after the lesson has happened, after they've forgotten what you guys covered in the lesson, okay? So that's my idea. If you have thoughts or suggestions on this, what else would you want to see in this kind of handout? And then imagine that this is the accompanying handout that would go with this piece if we were learning this piece. What sort of ideas do you have that build upon this? I can tell you some of the next steps that I'm thinking about is, the flame accent. Flame accent is something that you'll see over and over again. What is the evergreen flame accent teaching video that I would link to this? And eventually in my mind, I want to be able to tap or click something so that when I see the flame accent, it, 1, tells me that this is a flame accent, but 2, I can click on it or scan it or do something. And if I don't know how to play flame accent, it takes me to the video of Digital Huei teaching you how to play the flame accent. So theoretically, there's some sort of asset combined here that would teach you and get you 80% of the way there so that when you show up for your weekly lesson, you can actually play and do some of the things that are on this piece so that we can spend our lesson time giving you tailored feedback. Hey, notice this, see this. I want to spend as little of my lesson time with my student just delivering information that could be done, say, in a video. I want to spend most of my lesson time drawing my students' attention and awareness to, hey, you should listen for this, you should hear this. Here's the process that you need to use for this part, for what you're currently doing here. So yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. If you have some feedback, I'd love to hear back from you. If you've done something similar in the past, I'd love to hear any ideas or suggestions that you might have on it. And thanks for checking out this impromptu live. YouTube has created a new tab for specifically your live streams. And so again, this is just going to be the first of a ongoing series of little experiments, check-ins, tests on what this might look like for my content, but also for Ensemble Block as we keep going forward. So those of you who are watching this in post, thanks for jumping in. Shoot me a message. Let me know how things are going with you. And we're going to wrap here for today. Thanks again for coming in, and we will see you guys in the next live stream. Thanks, everyone.